Seasons change and summer is here, and there is an entirely new season for the restart of all sports, whether it's golf, basketball, or baseball. Hello and welcome to AAI, the podcast about analytics in sports. Here are my colleagues, data scientists, a couple of them. Andrew is in San Diego. Hello, Andrew.
Hello.
Andrew Engel joins us from San Diego, and Ari Kaplan joins us from Chicago. Hello, Ari.
Hello, everyone.
Ari is one of the leading evangelists for artificial intelligence in the industry globally. We're happy to have them. And I'm Phil Van Horn, joining you from the Los Angeles area. And we talk about a new season. It's actually a restart along with being new, but it's really a new day, guys, as each of the sports, as they restart, are facing some very unique circumstances. It's not now what would happen, but what is happening as seasons get underway, as leagues look at what is happening with COVID-19 impact. And then we have some other models to take a look at from Europe. So guys, let's dive in on this. One of the first things we can talk about, I guess, we'll take a look at PGA golf, because it has, they're competing, but there's some cautionary tales there. Andrew, why don't you go ahead and lead us off?
Yeah, we're now completed three tournaments now, is that right? Right, and the first week completed very successfully, but by the second week, we already had our first player test positive while on the tour, right? And we're now up to 5 players, 2 different caddies, which have taken their players out because of the social distancing. So, I mean, we expected this to happen, right? We expect this to be a problem in all of the sports as to what's going to happen as the individuals either get infected because they are traveling, they are interacting with the community in one way or another. And how are we going to react? How is this going to affect the sport?
Well, we're hearing from them, and Watney talked about how he believed asymptomatic until he lost his sense of taste. And now he's still, as we record this on Tuesday, he's still at a hotel room in Hilton Head Island and booking a rental car to make a 17-hour drive from South Carolina back to his home in Texas. But Ari, an entirely different thing is Major League Baseball adjusts not to infections in the middle of competition, but as players take a look at, they're checking out for the season before we even gather for practice.
Yeah, there's, well, since our last conversation, we had the commissioner come in and say, all right, MLB and the Players Association couldn't quite come to terms, so we'll do a 60-game season. So the weeks are just flying by. And, you know, as part of it, there's an abbreviated spring training, which is now summer training, and that is still in flux since Arizona is having a spike in cases, so they may not even play there. Some teams are doing it in their home stadiums, some are not. And then some players are starting just last night to opt out. Zimmerman, Joe Ross, others, for personal reasons. You know, largely, if they get infected, they don't want to infect their family or their young kids. And in parallel, some of the players and staff at different places, like the Texas Rangers, had significant number of employees testing as well. So, So I guess the interesting part is like players willingly opting out of money, service time as well, for lowering their personal risk.
Well, guys, this is what we're learning to do, and this is what we're going to talk about. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver says we have to learn to live with the virus, meaning the impact of it. So the Twins have already told 2 coaches in their 60s that they will not be with the team through this 60-game sprint. Mike Leake, right-handed pitcher with the Diamondbacks, the first known player to say he would not join it. From the defending world champs, Mr. Nat, Ryan Zimmerman was the one you alluded to, said he had 3 little ones and another family member at risk. And then Ian Desmond having a lengthy explanation of why he is choosing not to play at a walk year for his contract. And that really lit up social media last night. Compelling information to read. But Andrew, as we take a look at this now with the NBA, they're not clear, and Adam Silver's words are worth considering.
Well, before I go on to the NBA, it's not just the players and the coaches that are being asked not to move. The Twins also announced they weren't going to have the radio broadcasters travel with the team either, and they won't be broadcasting from the stadium. It's not clear if they'll travel independently or if they'll broadcast locally. But I expect, it's not just watching sports without fans in the stands, but watching sports where the announcers aren't even in the stands. Could be a very different experience for us. That'll definitely change the nature of the radio broadcast. But yeah, I mean, Adam Silver has come out and he said we have to learn to live with the virus. The NBA's claimed that they have contingency plans for most of these cases that may happen, which I mean, you have to do, right? It's the responsible thing for these leagues to do. But still, what happens if in the first round of the playoffs, someone on the Lakers test positive? What do you do at that point? Are they done? Do you postpone everything? Do you hold stuff back? It's not really clear, even if you have plans, how they're actually going to play out in reality. And then Ari alluded to the problems that Arizona is having and the potential problems that could cause for the Diamondbacks. But let's remember MLS and the NBA are both going to Florida, which is also in the midst of an outbreak. And so how is that going to work out? Are they going to reconsider, right? I mean, the NBA still has plenty of time to change plans. They were talking about the end of July before starting.
Yeah, they're still looking at possibly the 30th or the 31st, likely the 30th to restart. But guys, this is dangerously close to no longer what if for the NBA. In fact, the Nuggets just shut down their practice facility. The Nets are reopening after having shut down their facility. So,
and the Nets, one of their stars who tested positive has said he's not coming back this season, right? So, and the Nets are currently in the 7th position. I think they're up 6 with 8 games to go. So it's going to be really hard for them to fall out of the playoffs, but they may not have any of their stars playing in the playoffs. And what does that do to the tournament? How does that change the calculation for the various teams who may now be able to pass the Nets and force the Nets to play Milwaukee, right? So there's all sorts of interesting questions about the competition and the validity of that competition.
Well, guys, there are some lessons learned here. And Andrew, I'm going to stick with you for a minute. What have we learned from the successful Bundesliga season and from other aspects of soccer in Europe so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to call out, we've talked about the Bundesliga, we've talked about what we can learn from the Bundesliga, and they completed their season. So they were successful. I think there's a couple of things here we have to keep in mind. First, Germany reacted very fast and never had an outbreak like many other places in the United States or elsewhere in Europe, which probably made it easier for them to get through. They also started fast, right? So they're getting started when we're looking at a couple of their competitor leagues really just getting ramped up with a couple weeks in. But it is possible to complete. It is possible to keep people safe. It is possible to test and isolate players and have everything go forward. But then at the same time, you just have to look at one of the other big leagues in Europe that's facing a real problem, as Leicester is facing a major outbreak in the UK. And this weekend, Leicester is supposed to host a Premier League game at home. And if the government shuts down, does a stay-at-home order in Leicester, it's not clear exactly what that means. The Premier League claims that they can move it to a neutral site and they can make it work. But there's a lot of questions about that. And again, it calls into the question the fairness of the sporting event at that point.
But we'll come back to that because mainstream now is not what mainstream was just 4 months ago. But right now, let's do an economics lesson, guys. Let's talk about UCLA, Cal football, and Under Armour. This is fascinating to me and potentially catastrophic for the UCLA and the UC Berkeley athletic departments. Under Armour wants to drop both. That's about a $500 million package, because they've sponsored both. UCLA is the big dog here, $280 million slice of that 500. UCLA will likely settle. They're not going to get hurt entirely, but this is a tough one. They're going to have to find a new partner. Cal is going to fight it, claiming that they're really not, and that's the latest information out of the Bay Area, that they're going to fight giving this deal up. But those are some big numbers. Ari, how do we use analytics to calculate value here? How do we get such big numbers?
Yeah, well, a couple thoughts here. One is, sports traditionally has been big business. The television contracts have been tremendous. The merchandising contracts have been incredibly large. UCLA and Cal, big markets, California, historical entities, Coach John Wooden, personal inspiration. And Under Armour is all about the brand, and so that's the sports side of my brain. And the other is, before I joined Data Robot, I worked in marketing analytics. So large company called Nielsen and their competitor IRI Worldwide. I worked for both. And we worked with some of the largest brands in the world, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Unilever, and so on. And marketing is big spend. So you don't have to be those big companies I mentioned, but the number for general, most industries in America, marketing is number 1, 2, or 3 in terms of the highest expense. If you're a manufacturer, it's like the cost of your goods, then marketing. If you're a consulting agency, it's your employees, then marketing. Pretty much everyone else, it's marketing is your top spend. So I used to also work for Oracle. At one point, I was the worldwide Oracle user group president, and they spend about 20%, 1/5 of all of their revenue on marketing. So first of all, just to emphasize, marketing spend is huge. The brand of your business is incredibly impactful. In terms of CPG, that was the biggest industry, consumer product goods, 24%. So in it, you have marketing analytics or marketing ROI. And before machine learning, it's been about 50 years. Nielsen invented marketing mix, marketing ROI capabilities. But you basically put an ad out and you can't really track what the value of it is. Maybe you could do a survey. Phil, Andrew, did you see the latest new Coke ad? But that's kind of unscientific. Another metric is how many people could potentially have seen the ad on TV or in a billboard. So it's been kind of hard to measure until more recent times, when you could find scanning data and see, for example, bringing it back to Under Armour. Under Armour did an advertisement with the UCLA star, or they can measure the number of jerseys sold, and then they can tie it back to a targeted campaign and see what the jump in number of sales were for whatever that ad was. So there are ways to much more accurately market and pinpoint the value. So it has to be pretty devastating for Under Armour to trying to drop these deals, since UCLA especially is huge in their sports branding. And the ROI of marketing in today's world, where it is targeted and very measurable, it's one of the best investments a company could make. So it just speaks to the changing world. But yeah, to bring it all full circle, marketing, one of the top 3 spends of a company, and the value of marketing is huge. Therefore, Under Armour trying to drop UCLA and Cal is eye-opening, and everyone should be paying attention.
I like that. We should be paying attention. Well, guys, let's turn the page again. Or Andrew, go ahead. Sure.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things we also have to think about here, just from a purely business perspective, because Under Armour's not stopping their sponsorship of college athletics, right? So it's continuing its contracts with a number of other teams, a number of other programs around the country. And I wonder if there's a little bit into this that, as Ari says, people now can track the value of these sorts of investments. And when times get tight and people go looking, they tend to look at the things that aren't providing the same level of value. And as much as it hurts me to say, as an alum of another Pac-10, Pac-12 school, the Pac-12 has been pretty down in both football and basketball for a number of years, which is almost certainly hurting the value of both of those. And then we oftentimes talk about the East Coast bias in sports reporting, sports television, polls, whatever it may be. Because if you're starting your games so that they're starting at 10 p.m. Eastern time, like oftentimes happens with the Pacific Coast teams, it can be very hard to actually get the eyeballs of the people that Under Armour is trying to reach. So I think there's some of it's a West Coast versus the rest of the country, and some of it is really a performance issue.
Well, guys, as we turn the calendar to July, we can now look back at 100 days without sports from what we'll call middle of March to late June. That is the new mainstream. And we're going to go from no sports to by the time we get to the end of July, middle of August, a clogged sports calendar. So as we do that, different aspects of sports will become increasingly mainstream in ways we would not have considered before COVID-19 impact. In fact, you could probably go back to the last norm was when we did the college bowl games and the Super Bowl, really, because we never really got beyond that. We didn't get March Madness in, for example, and we've talked about what that meant to the betting industry. So how will, in the new norm, COVID-19 impact and scramble betting lines and games as players juggle, coaches juggle, and how much more of that information is going to be transparent to the public as we look at the next 30 to 45 days down the road? Andrew, why don't you go first, please?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and we've already seen some of this scramble, right? We saw Fox has given up rights to the US Open this year to NBC because of the timing. US Open was moved into September. It now conflicts with Fox's NFL coverage, and they had to pick and choose. And so I think we talked about this earlier in one of our prior podcasts, that one of the interesting things is we're going to have gone from absolutely no sports to almost too much sports, where there's not enough time for all the networks to broadcast all of the games. So that's one very interesting thing, is how does that change things? And then as we convert into the sports betting side, how do you track your games? How do you actually watch your games? Right? I mean, historically, people would go to the sports books in Vegas and sit there because they could watch all of them simultaneously. It's not clear if that's going to be a possibility very shortly as well. So it's going to be an interesting thing as people change. It should be really good for online betting and people who are building apps that will help push information about the sports or the particular matches, games you're interested in. But I think the line question is also a really interesting one, because right now I can build models, and I have built models to predict who's going to win. But if I built a model in the NBA and I was using it in the NBA playoffs, we have a pretty good sense of who's going to play. We know if someone is, injuries are relatively infrequent. I can adapt to injuries. But we're going to have these cases where at game time, someone's going to test positive that day, become unavailable. It becomes really interesting that, we can say they're not playing for some reason, but we've already seen issues with HIPAA compliance where sports teams won't announce which player tested positive for COVID-19. So I think it's going to become much harder to build those models or maintain those models, and a lot less certain if I'm placing my bets 2, 3, 4 weeks out, as opposed to, real-time betting might be a safer way to go.
Yeah, and interesting on that HIPAA comment. I was reading that there's going to be an injured list in baseball and a separate COVID list, and the injury list will be public. And I saw this on Twitter that Brian Cashman with the Yankees said that teams will not announce which players are on the COVID list, but it's pretty obvious if somebody's not on the injured list and they're not at the game that that's what happened. So it's interesting that all of that's going down. And for HIPAA laws, yes, you're adhering to it, but you could read between the lines and figure it out pretty much that day.
That raises some interesting legal questions. I'm glad I'm not the one having to make that or navigate those rules.
Well, guys, our last thought is minor league baseball 2020, rest in peace. Not a surprise, but this cuts deep. If you're a baseball fan, this is deep into the family, deep into the fabric of the game. So, Ari, you're our baseball guy. As you consider no minor league baseball at all this year, what's your primary thought?
Yeah, well, number one, for safety, that sounds like the right call, but it's still tough. The minor leagues have been around since 1901, and this is zero. How many times they have not had a season? So this will be the first time, 119 years, which is tough. Also, having worked for teams and traveled around the minors, a lot of these organizations are like the lifeblood of the community. Peoria, Knoxville, Chattanooga. It's like the life of the city and a big economic and social engine. So tough to see that happen. 261 minor league teams, roughly 8,000 players are being affected. Also, what's not clear is which organizations are continuing to pay their minor leaguers and which aren't. I mean, the ones that have announced they are, there's some, but there's about half of the organizations haven't made an explanation of it. That's one thing. And then 1 year to 2 year out is development of players that get missed. So what happens when elite players can continue to thrive with a missed season, but kind of log jams everyone. The 5-round draft, you have an infusion of some talent that aren't playing anywhere. So those are some of the thoughts. Is tough for the community, tough for the players, tough for development in the next couple of years.
Andrew, you thought, we were talking earlier, one of your first thoughts about the St. Paul Saints, one of the top independent clubs and clearly part of the summer in the Twin Cities in Minnesota.
Yeah, absolutely. Although the American Association, the independent league they're participating in, is going. I think it's starting later this week. Although the St. Paul Saints are not playing in St. Paul. The St. Paul Saints, as I understand it, have set up shop in Sioux Falls, which just feels really weird from an independent baseball perspective. But some of these leagues are going to take place. I think there's going to be some interesting thing of what happens there with the decision about minor league baseball, and if teams stop paying some of these players, what do they end up doing? I think the other thing, Ari was talking about the development. It's been really interesting to watch teams over the last couple of days announce the 60-man roster that they've brought on, because you've seen teams that clearly are playing to win. And yes, everyone has brought some of their top prospects, but you've seen some teams looking to win where they may not have brought a top prospect from a lower level minor league, whereas there are other teams who admittedly are probably making the right decision with their major league roster, but they've brought all of their top 10 or all of their top 15 into that to allow them to continue developing.
Well, Guys, that's going to provide us the foundation for lots of this kind of conversation for the rest of the summer and deep into the fall. I appreciate your time. It's we've never had a boring time when we do this, and the time for the restart is here. The time for the log jam is near. Well, that'll wrap us up on AAI, the podcast about the business of analytics and sports. There's Andrew in San Diego. Andrew, could say goodbye, please.
Yeah, goodbye. It was a pleasure.
And Hari in Chicago. We'll see you next week, Hari.
See you next week.
And thanks for joining us on AAI.